reading with NAASR and Zohrab to share a fabulous lineup of books with you. I hope you'll read along with us. Today is our second event featuring We Are All Armenian, a groundbreaking anthology of voices from the diaspora. It's a diverse collection of meditations on what makes us each Armenian and how our culture and identities have shaped our lives. The writers you'll hear from today are claiming their space within the Armenian community, be it as an Armenian Black Nipmuc, a diasporan writing fiction based in Hayastan, or a queer Armenian. I'm particularly proud to present this anthology because its vision aligns with IALA's, to say we are all Armenian. We belong here, and we will build our own stage from which to be heard. Through his tireless work as an editor, Aram Mrjoian has built a stage out of the pages of this book, and for that, we thank you. In addition to being a thoughtful editor, Aram is a writer, critic, and educator. His writing has appeared in numerous publications, and he has served in editorial roles at the Southern Review of Books, the Southeast Review, and Tri-Quarterly. He was an editor-at-large at the Chicago Review of Books, a 2022 Creative Armenia AGBU Fellow, and is now an associate fiction editor at Guernica. Aram, the stage is yours.
Olivia, thank you so much for that lovely introduction. I'm really excited to be here and just pretty overwhelmed with the reception to this book. I'm really grateful for it. And so happy to be here with a few of the contributors from it today. This book kind of came about in March 2020, started having conversations about it a week before kind of the pandemic really became a looming national story in the US. And what's really kind of remarkable is at the time, I was just kind of I just had this idea to bring together some Armenian writers and kind of start having this conversation. And so 3 years later, when the book was published, it was really, I guess, unexpected for me as the editor to kind of see so many people reading and engaging with it, to have the first print run kind of sell out. And so I should say the books were back ordered for a little bit. If you were struggling to get the book, it is now available again as of Wednesday. So go order your copy now while you can. But just really, really happy for it. And thank you so much to the International Armenian Literary Alliance for having us. This is the anthology. I'm going to show it off. I'm just going to read 2 paragraphs from my introduction and then introduce our readers one by one, and then we'll have a Q&A. So this is from the editor's note. Anthologies, by their very nature, are as defined by their omissions as they are by their inclusions. No matter how comprehensive, an anthology will always be a momentary attempt, stuck in time as well as limited by space, editorial awareness, and financial constraints. This perhaps sounds cryptic, but as I set out to edit this collection, and with Armenian history in mind, I very much worried about this project's potential pitfalls and shortcomings. Diasporan Armenians cannot be pinned to a number of essays that is any smaller than the total diasporan population, and even that is problematic. Only a brief and glancing representation of each person and community at a singular moment. This is to say the Armenian diaspora is both hyperlocal and intersectionally global. There is no such thing as a monolithic ethnic identity. To imagine so is harmful, marginalizing, and dangerous. To create a hierarchy or checklist of one's right to their ethnicity is an act of violence. One of the notable themes that arises throughout these essays is the writers not feeling Armenian enough. Many of these contributors share the sense of being pushed out and othered from both inside and outside of their communities. Indeed, this is another sensation I had when I signed up to edit these works. I believed then, and still believe now, in my abilities as an editor, but I've never been able to quash the self-damaging notion that I'm living behind the facade of an ethnic identity I have little claim to. My name, yes, is Armenian. My heritage, yes, is Armenian. But I don't speak the language. I don't attend the church. I've never spent much time in Armenian communities. I've never traveled back to the land of my ancestors. I'm still constantly learning the basics of diaspora and Armenian culture, feeling simultaneously distant from and near to this part of who I am. I guess I should not have been surprised then to read the same notion expressed more eloquently for many of the writers whose works are included in this collection. I'll stop there because we're going to hear from those writers whose work much more eloquently kind of touches on some of the things I was hoping for when I set out on this. And we'll be starting with Chris McCormick, who I'll introduce now. Chris McCormick is the author of The Gimmicks, a New York Times Editor's Choice, and short story collection, Desert Boys, winner of the 2017 Stonewall Book Award, Barbara Gideon's Literature Award. His essays and stories have appeared or are forthcoming in The Atlantic, the Los Angeles Times, the Southern Review, and other publications. The son of an Armenian mother and an American father, he grew up on the California side of the Mojave Desert before earning his MFA at the University of Michigan. He's an associate professor in the creative writing program at Minnesota State University, Mankato.
Thank you, Aram. Thank you so much. Thank you, Olivia. Thank you, Josep. Thank you, everybody who contributed to this book. I've been reading it with a visceral sense of recognition, and I'm learning a lot, and I just feel so grateful to be part of it. And thank you, everybody, for being here today, no matter when you are. There's a lot of different time zones involved today, so thank you for being here. Yeah, I'm going to read just very briefly from my essay in the book. I'm going to start on the top of page 71 and kind of finish at the bottom of 72. So just a couple pages. Just a little background. I wrote a novel set in Armenia before I had gone to Armenia. So I had internalized all of these stories that I'd grown up listening to from my mother and from my cousins and aunts and uncles, grandparents, and had the audacity to try to imagine a story set there before going there. And then as soon as I got a book contract, I freaked out and thought, oh no, what have I done? I should have gone before I wrote the book. And so I went and basically went to see what I had gotten wrong, what, if anything, I had gotten right. And the essay is kind of my exploration of just kind of deconstructing that dichotomy of right and wrong and thinking about the relationship between imagination and memory rather than such a stark, correct, quote unquote, correct idea of a place. So top of 71, I'll start reading. After winning the Nobel Prize for Literature in 2017, Kazuo Ishiguro delivered a lecture that included a profound rumination on the link between fiction and memory. His parents had taken him from Japan to England when he was 5 years old, and when he began to write, he had yet to return. My Japan was unique, he said, and at the same time terribly fragile, something not open to verification from outside that drove me on to work. What I was doing was getting down on paper that world's special colors, mores, etiquette, its dignity, its shortcomings, everything I'd ever thought about the place before they faded forever from my mind. It was my wish to rebuild my Japan in fiction, to make it safe, so that I could thereafter point to a book and say, yes, there's my Japan, inside there. Was this why I'd waited so long to travel to Armenia? Was this why I'd set my novel there in the first place? Only after getting down on paper the special colors of the world I'd been imagining, for the 5 years spent writing the novel, yes, but also for all the years of my life, was I ready to see the other Armenia, the real one. I hoped so anyway. My claim to the country was flimsy after all, my remove from it even greater than Ishiguro's from Japan. It was possible, likely even, that my increasingly hazy imaginings would never seem as true to others as they felt to me. It was possible the real Armenia would bear no resemblance to my own, and in supplanting the place of my imagination would prove its falseness unbearably once and for all. The first few days in Yerevan, I felt a certain dissonance, a disorienting kind of recognition. So much in the city, from the beautiful stonework on the grounds of the central square, which reminded me of the rugs I'd grown up playing on, to the familiar feasts of lavash and salted cheese and fresh tomatoes at cafes on Abovian Street, revived my own memories of home, that place far from Armenia that I had no need to imagine knowing it intimately. I began to speak with increasing confidence in Armenian. I felt I had come a long way in order to travel not very far at all. One day early in my trip over small cups of strong coffee at an outdoor cafe, I met my mother's cousin, Hachik. Family lore has it that he tried and failed to convince my mother not to leave Armenia more than 4 decades ago. Now he'd heard I was in the country and he wanted to meet me. Hachik is in his 70s, and on the day I met him, a heat wave roiled across the continent. He would invite me to his apartment, he said, if not for the lack of air conditioning. Besides, when his wife died, she left a mess. I tried to offer my condolences, but my aunt, who traveled with me to help translate, was laughing. Hachik's wife had died 40 years earlier. Hachik asked about my other half, and I thought he meant Mairead, my fiancée, who had come with me to Armenia but was off that day on her own adventure. But Hachik meant blood. Where did my father come from? Irish, I said. Whiskey, Hachik said, and that was the end of his curiosity about the man my mother loves. Hachik was there to talk, and since I can't speak Armenian nearly as well as I can understand it, I was glad for his stories. One of them went like this. Before his wife died, she and Hachik would go to parties and come home with completely different kinds of information. She would ask him if he saw the crystal dish the hosts had purchased for the sweets, or the new stemware their drinks had been served in. But Hachik had noticed none of that. I came home talking about the short way two old friends had spoken to each other, belying hidden tension, he said, or the way a wife had placed a hand gently on her husband's arm when he reached for another glass of cognac. You sound like a writer, I said, and my aunt translated. Then we were talking about Saroyan. Bravo, Hachik said when I expressed my love for my name is Aram, and the injustice of Pushkin's worldwide fame compared to Tumanian's relative unknown Saturn. But who cares about fame, Hachik said. A writer is interested only in his origins. That's why you're here, isn't it? A writer wants to know at every level where it is he comes from. His words were on my mind a few days later when I visited the Temple of Garni, a first-century pagan temple restored in 1975 by a process called anastylosis, a method of architectural restoration that uses as many of the original stones as possible. Where the Garni restorers had to use new materials, they chose blank stones that stood out next to the ancient ones, the difference between the materials purposefully stark. They wanted visitors to be able to discern between the original and the added. In this way, I could see exactly what had been salvaged and what had been supplied. When Hachik said origins, he meant genealogy and geography, he meant blood. But as I compared the spongy touch of the ancient basalt to the smooth faces of the blank stones, I considered the combination of memory and imagination I was really there to investigate. A kind of inventive anastylosis, memory and imagination. Only I wasn't sure which was the original and which the support.
Thank you so much, Chris.
Thank you.
All right, next up, we have Kohar Avakian. Kohar is a Nipmuc, Black and Armenian mixed media artist, visual storyteller, and scholar from Worcester, Massachusetts, the ancestral land of her tribe, the Nipmuc Nation, and home to one of the oldest Armenian communities in the US. She holds a BA in history, modified with Native American studies, from Dartmouth College, and is currently pursuing her PhD in American Studies at Yale. As a descendant of genocide survivors still awaiting reparations, she believes in the unparalleled power of learning about other people's histories through their own eyes. Adding vibrancy and color to her life as a graduate student, photography, oral history interviews, and multimedia art, digital collage, visual art, and ceramics have provided her an outlet to explore the intersection of race, reparations, memory, kinship, and virtual presence in the digital 21st century.
Thank you so much, Aram, for that kind introduction, and Chris for that beautiful reading. I'm so honored to be here and to be a part of this incredible anthology. And just as you heard, I love hearing people's histories out of their own mouths. And this chapter, starting on page 37, An Interracial Love History, is my attempt to collage and weave together the stories that my family taught me. And I conducted a lot of these oral history interviews in 2015 as a history major. And I think the reason this anthology is so important is because it allows us to have space in fields where these histories are often shut out. And that's my attempt here. Okay, I'm setting a little timer or else I will read over. Growing up, I genuinely believed that when you married someone, you became that person's race. My sisters did too. In our eyes, everyone in our family was the same. We shared the same interests, habits, and characteristics. We celebrated and took part in the same cultures. We spoke the same language and we understood the same things. After all, we even had the same last name. We were one Armenian, Black, and Nipmuc family because that was just what we were. There was nothing else to it. You see, Mommy could cook all of Nene's recipes like they were her own. effortless like rolling sarma from the backyard at the kitchen table while holding a conversation across the hall. She always seemed to resort to Armenian to scold me. Small hands reaching for Kinder eggs at Bachnan's bakery. Mitetnar, don't touch. Mummy was the one who insisted that she and Baba give us Armenian names. I know Nene appreciated that. Talin, Carene, Nairi, and Kohar. Good Armenian names. Now everyone will know what they are. She was and still is on the board of our church. Drove us to and from Kids Club all the way down Highland Street and back. Kids Club, that's what we called Armenian school. It all started in Hokur and Nene's third floor apartment, a triple decker on Hudson Street. Nene would make us sit for hours at the dining room table. I, pen, kim, ta, yech, za. Just like she did for Dikran Amo, Moses Amo, Hokur, and Baba before us, in the old country. Candy bowls filled with sweets were our incentive, accompanied by The Price is Right in the background, Nene's favorite show. I wonder what she liked most about it. I remember staring in amazement at those bright gleaming cars showcased by skinny white models with pretty white teeth, and those money-hungry contestants jumping up and down for the opportunity to get a hold of that one thing we all came here for, a better life. As for Baba, he always allowed me and my sisters to be as we were, embracing every part of us so that we never felt like we had to choose. With his cool and charismatic demeanor, he could talk to anyone. I mean anyone. And he fit right in with my mom's family too. He even learned how to do our hair, usually in pigtail braids with colorful hairballs tied to the ends. Mommy did it better, of course, but it was the effort and care that mattered. In Worcester, Baba was the glue that fused our families together, a father figure for his daughters, nieces, and nephews alike. We always had cousins at our home from all sides, usually in the backyard, with Dede's grape leaves cradling us in. Pinkies strung together, Michigan hopping toward the future that was almost stolen from his past. I never knew Dede, but I felt like I did. He died in 1993, 2 years before I was born, yet his imprint remains. One of his plants is still blooming in our home today. He and Nene were in an arranged marriage, the odd couple, as Baba says. But somehow it worked. Posing for a picture on their wedding day in Burj Hamud, Nene stood tall, chin up on a wooden stool, attempting to look proportional to Dede's height. I heard so many stories about Dede to the point that he seemed larger than life, literally. Then I realized that maybe Nene, barely reaching 5 feet herself, was just really short. But don't be mistaken. Nene was small but mighty, and very pious too. She could command attention from an entire room without making a sound. That's where Baba gets it from. Naturally, she was always the one to bless our meals. When she spoke, everyone stopped to listen to what she had to say. It was the type of reverence reserved for really important people. You just knew she had seen some things, and she had. Nene's family came from Marash and Gesaria in Western Armenia, from a time and space now kept alive only in memory, where I might only visit on Google Maps or in my dreams. Okay, I'm at time, so I will stop there. Thank you all so much.
Thank you so much. An editorial insight for you is that when Kohar sent me the first draft of that essay, I read it and it was so polished that I was kind of like, what do I do? Like, I was like, I guess my job is done with this one. Like, we'll just kind of, like, that goes in the book as is. I had to like actually kind of think about it a little bit. And our last reader for the day, before we open up our conversation, JP Der Boghossian is the founder of the Queer Armenian Library, the world's first library devoted to literature by and about queer Armenians, a 2022 Lambda Literary Fellow, He is at work on an essay collection titled A Home at the Beginning of the World. He hosts the podcast, This Queer Book Saved My Life, and 7 Minutes in Book Heaven. See the library at queerarmenianlibrary.com, and you can listen to the podcast at thisqueerbook.com. And lastly, if you want to connect with JP, you can do so at jp.boghossian.com. Welcome.
The imposter syndrome is real, y'all. Kohar and Chris. Wow, how am I in the same room with y'all? Okay, woof. I'm gonna get my wits together about me. So I am gonna read part of my essay. It's a fragment essay, which you'd think would be really easy for this situation. Just kind of pick, a few paragraphs from here and there, and that didn't turn out to be the case. So the essay is ultimately about the Queer Armenian Library and how that came to be. So I'm going to read that particular section, which came out of the desire to understand my own experiences navigating being queer and Armenian-American, right? So here we go. My library of queer Armenian books sits below my shelves of queer literature and above my shelves of Armenian literature. The book spines are colorful: electric yellow, lime green, teal, royal purple, black, and fire engine red. The words that pop out at you are pride, men are men, lion women, me as her, queered, and balls. I believe I have one of the most comprehensive libraries of queer Armenian books. There could be others, like ancient Armenian coins buried in the earth, unknown until I dig them up. Even as I write this, with help from others, I'm still finding new ones. It took a few years to assemble. I started with Google and used all these search terms in every combination: book, novel, gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, LGBT Armenian, LGBT Armenians, LGBT Armenia. That led me to books, websites, zines, Twitter, Instagram, and the like. I came across the names of queer Armenian organizations and online publications, two of which, Unzipped Gay Armenia and the Hyphen magazine, provide a crucial trove of reviews and book lists. I discovered websites that had ceased to exist, and I tracked down their URLs to use the Internet Archive Wayback Machine to look at archives of their pages. Amazon and Barnes & Noble were other obvious search engines, but I also needed A-Books, Better World Books, Book Depository, Alibris, Thrift Books, and half-price books. There were problems. My search process provided me with books, but what about the authors' identities? Some didn't list their sexual orientation or gender identity in their bios. Some didn't have bios at all. There was an ethical question. Many of the books had only 1 or 2 or no copies left for purchase. One of these books I could only find in a major university library. Now, I could borrow that book and then never return it, skipping out on the fines and fees, giving up on my rights to interlibrary loans forever. And could I keep the book or prepare to pay a couple $100 of fines and fees? When I read through my library, I think I have all the words I will ever need to describe the conjunctions and hyphens linking queer and Armenian and American, and yet I never seem to have enough. I can stand as a keynote speaker in front of an audience of 500 and declare that I'm queer and living in a long-term intergenerational polyamorous relationship, but then I crumple into a silent victim when forced to talk to my family members. I expanded my sense of self and humanity by creating the library, but it reminds me every day that my humanity can't even fill an entire bookshelf. I lean into the resilience I learned from the Armenian community to survive the Armenian community. Part of the library describes my conjunctions and hyphens as binaries or seesaws. To achieve a sense of balance, I must stand in the center of the seesaw. If I were to settle into a seat on either side, claiming an identity, then I would just end up crouched on the ground, watching my other identity hang in the air. Another part of the library illustrates that in that slim space of my conjunction and in the small stroke of my hyphen, I have oceans of words, waves of confusions and attractions and defiance and shame and love and yearnings. My hyphen is as metaphorical and literal as the Atlantic Ocean. But because of the library, I read words like queer and Armenian and American as high energy particle beams that we hurl into the conjunctions and hyphens of our lives, like a hadron collider, blasting them through the corridors at dizzying speeds, smashing into each other with a malevolent or banal or desperate intent to observe the Big Bang, witnessing how these words burst into terrifying new atoms and galaxies and stars and terrifying and merciful new gods and life. Please be merciful, life. With all of us tugged by the inescapable gravity of new planets pulling us back to the irrepressible first words ever written in classical Armenian, to know wisdom and instruction, to perceive the words of understanding. Thank you.
Thank you so much, JP. That ending gets me every time. It just has so much power in it. I love it so much. And thank you to all three of our readers. This was just really wonderful. A reminder that you can write questions in the chat, and then they'll be passed along to me once we open it up to the audience. We'll be having some more moderated discussion before that. I should say, Chris, one of the things I thought about a lot with this anthology in general, like when your essay came in, I was so excited about this idea of imagining and seeing, because it just felt so kind of attuned to some of my own experiences. And like, as someone who still has not traveled to Armenia, kind of like this wondering of like, you know, what is over there, and will going over there change my perspective? And then like talking about it and feeling like that same, like when this book came out, I had kind of, I think, that same like, oh shit moment of like what am I going to do when I'm at events? Like, are people gonna, you know, that imposter syndrome does come through strong. So I guess a question I have for all three of you, and anyone can jump in first if they have a strong thought on it, is when we set out on this project, when I sent you emails in 2020 that were essentially just, you know, hey, I want you to write an essay for this anthology, I gave very little direction. I'm kind of curious, like, in the last 3 years, what's changed between now and then? And like, what realizations have you had now, kind of having the book in your hand and reading it and reading the rest of it, you know, everything else alongside it, the information you didn't have when we started out?
It's a great question. I think we're all trying to think, give that question the dignity of serious thought. You know, it's been such a strange 3 years, obviously, and it doesn't feel like 3 years, does it? And I just saw my family for the first time, really, in that time, a couple weeks ago, and my Armenian family, I should say. And again, the jokes about be careful what you say around him, he's going to use this for a book, you know, this, you know, he's that kind of sense of humor that is meant lovingly, but of course makes you feel other than outside, like, you know, outcast by your family. I'm like an anthropologist in my family, according to them, you know, that sense of imposter syndrome, or that I think over the past 3 years, although of course I still deal with that, I've gained a confidence. I think this book has gone a long way to help that the sense that that there is, as you mentioned in the introduction, there is no checklist. There is no checklist to think, you know, of the place as a moving, constantly evolving, time-dependent thing that isn't so fixed and static is one thing. But I think since the book has come together, I've started to think of Armenianness that way too. That we're all moving targets. We're all changing, and yeah, I think that confidence. Although I still haven't gathered the courage to say as much to my family. I think internally I feel a confidence that no, I'm not representing Armenianness. There is no such thing to represent for me. I can only contribute, you know, my angle of experience and my ideas, and you know, and so anyways, I would just say confidence in that sense, and just admiration, reading more voices from the diaspora who are building a mosaic in my mind that makes me see a much larger picture of what it means to be Armenian.
I love that imagery that you just put out for us about this mosaic. I see it as a collage of voices that are so important, that I think in 2020, in the isolated spaces we were writing from and responding from and thinking with one another at that time, yet in isolation because of quarantine and the state of chaos that, you know, we are in the midst of, that this book has actually been in many ways an act of repair work in my mind. It's an act of healing. So much pain took place and is still ongoing from 2020 to now. And there's no beginning and ending of it. And I think this was, for me, an act of alchemy is the word that comes to mind. So many of the interviews I listened to, I actually, when I say they didn't have a place in the history department, it's because I got feedback from advisors like, oh, some of those interviews are out of scope, as if these stories of the Lebanese Civil War don't matter to our beings today, even though that's what created who I am. And that is in my own family history. Of course, the genocide is an unspoken collective memory we're all drawing from. But I do agree that this, just being in conversation and in collage and kind of bringing our voices together in one frame has validated a lot of that trauma that was unspoken and in that everyday, bringing it into our everyday work. Like, I'm a grad student, so I see 2020 into now being like, wow, if I think about it simply in schoolwork, it's not that simple. It's this book has been a way for me to also give myself permission to bring my art into my intellectual work, or however we try to divide those things. I've always loved creative writing. And I just am so grateful for this opportunity, not only for my own self, but I really think it was an act of healing for my family, because a lot of my Hokwood, for example, who's mentioned in this book, right before it came out, and I had to send her a copy, I was like, oh, please, please I hope I got all the details right, that all these stories, she experienced them firsthand, and so many people in the book obviously are the reason I had these stories. And she was saying, I've had this urge to put our family's stories into some type of, I don't know what I can create, and I feel like I'm not doing enough for our ancestors. And I mentioned, oh, well, Hokwood, I wrote this chapter. And I'd like to report back. She was very impressed. She said it was completely accurate. I was like, whew, it was a huge weight off my whole shoulders. And my dad, my Baba, also loved it as well. And I think it's helped me heal and help our family know our history. And I think that in itself. Also, my dad read the whole volume cover to cover. He's saying, seeing it in the middle of everyone else's stories is actually what makes it the most powerful. And I would resonate with that completely. It is a work that's so special because it's bringing together all these voices. So thank you.
The only thing that I would add to that is that this is the first anthology that of Armenian writers I've read that actually depicted the world that I live in, the people, the Armenians that I interact with. I feel like previous ones were trying to the writers were trying to prove that they were like upholding this ideal, whereas the folks in this are saying, look, we are all Armenian, right? There are all these various ways of how we are living in the world. And this is the first time that I read that. And Kohar, to talk about the healing bit, like I've literally had an Armenian queer Armenian want to talk about how this book saved their life on the podcast that I run, because they were like, I just cried all the way through it. The person, right, was saying that. And so we're in the process of recording that episode. So I think there is a healing component because it is so much more reflective of the community, right, that we see today. And I for me anyway, and I'll just speak to my own experience, when I've read previous anthologies, there were no queer people, or there was one queer person, and that person is on this call, or there was another person I'm thinking of, right, as well. So to have multiple queer voices, to have folks from across the diaspora, it just was much more reflective of where I feel we are today. And so that's why I'm also happy that IALA is helping to promote this book, and there are other IALA writers in there, because do I want to say like we're at a tipping point of like what Armenian writing could be? Maybe. I don't know if I'm a person qualified to say that, but I will say from a queer standpoint, I would have to like re-edit the section here and add so many more writers since 2020, because there has been a kind of proliferation of queer Armenian writing that has come just since 2020. So I think that's very exciting to see. And if this is any indication from my like amateurness as a writer of where the future is headed, I'm very excited to see volume 2 of We Are All Armenian.
I keep saying this. I am totally for a volume 2. I'm totally for someone else taking on the editorial work if they want to do it. So if anyone is like in the crowd and thinking like, this is what I want to do, I will put you in contact with my editor. We can get it going. I'll write something for you. Happy to do it. But JP, I kind of want to continue on that track just a little bit. Selfishly, like this is the first time I'm seeing y'all in a while, or like the first time that we've communicated in a while. So much of what we did for the anthology was over email, sending drafts back and forth, talking about proofs, stuff like that. And JP, I say I want to start with you because when we were working on this essay together, the Queer Armenian Library was coming together and you were doing a lot of work on it. And now I look now and there's a podcast, the library has grown, like a lot of the work around that has grown. So I really want to hear what each of you are, again, selfishly, I want to hear what you're up to now and like what has changed in your own creative life over the past 3 years and kind of your current projects.
Do I have to go first? No, you're reminding me actually, yeah, as we were working on this, the library was, I think, if you go and look at it now, it's its third design. It took 3 designs. I think it had a different URL at one point. I had to like email you and be like, no, that's the wrong URL. We changed the URL for the web address. So I think that, and even now we've brought on a volunteer managing editor who's helping with the library, Natalie Cruz, who's going to be helping to build out the library and even is going to be building like the art wing. I was like, yeah, a library can have art. We can have an art wing, right? So I think that project is coming into a life of its own, and I'm really happy for that because I'm kind of, yeah, it was like my project, but I'm really happy that it's being kind of, I don't say taken over, but kind of evolving into something that's more community run now, which I think is really exciting. And I think it's really exciting to see like the connections that have been made. Thank you, IALA. I think a lot of that has been IALA organizing like the first reading of queer Armenian writers worldwide on a global level, to have panels of publishers and to have panels of writers who had written the first YA novel or the first memoir or something like that. So and I think, I guess just personally for me, where the podcast came from was, I think directly correlated to the library of seeing how books can have that saving feature, and then just want to talk to more queer folks about how books save their lives, right? Get more of a, a reading list that way. But I think also it takes on an additional layer as we're seeing all of these book bans happening right within the United States. And I was just at a talk last night where the queer books are at the forefront of that right now, but there's a library in Texas where they're basically going after all types of cultural books, not just queer and trans, but books by BIPOC authors. And they were basically told by the courts, like, you can't ban these books. And so now they're literally going to shut down the libraries. They won't have public libraries, right, in this part of Texas, because they would rather have no libraries than have libraries that have books that are representative of their people, right? And so I think that this book, this anthology, the stuff that I'm doing with the podcast, I'm also hopeful is just raising the relevance of literature and how it can have that saving feature for us right now. So, but I'll stop there because I'm really interested to hear Kohar and Chris as well, what you all have to say to this.
Sure. What I'm up to right now, getting through grad school. I took my qualifying exams and I passed last week. So that is literally the most recent thing I've done. I did it out of order. I defended my prospectus last semester, which was strange, but I've really been I've been thinking a lot about recognition and reparations. That's what I've been doing a lot of thinking work with. A lot of, they consider qualifying this process, which is often like academic hazing. I had to trick myself into living with intellectual companions. And a lot of the companions I was living with have really, one, validated so much of what was put into the chapter in We Are All Armenian, which felt like the safe space to say it. Now I'm bringing that, it's creeping into my work, and I'm really figuring out my voice around just giving myself permission to make some strong claims that you will read one day. But one thing that's really helped with that, JP, I also host a podcast, which you might have seen on social media, Name It Pod, with my best friend, who's also a PhD student here. We went to college together. She's Black and Muslim, and we're constantly giving ourselves permission to say the things that we might not necessarily feel supported in a history classroom, for example, where they're only, they're limiting what you can say, or the requirements of the discussion. So I think opening up my throat chakra, one might say, or trying to do a lot of that with visual art as well. So I really love this idea of incorporating visual art more into all of our interventions. And I'm really looking forward to the summer, being home in Massachusetts, reconnecting with my tribe, the Nipmuc Nation, plug to them, getting back onto the land, and kind of, I know it's like when I said, it's hard to write and think when you're only in isolation. So that reconnection period is so important to like really figure out what needs to be said. So I'm really, you're seeing me fresh out of a week of a lot of studying, but I'm on the other side now.
Yeah, that's great. And I'll be brief. Since I'm on the other side as a professor, I'm trying to help grad students get through. And my work life is two sides of the same coin, my teaching and my writing. And although there's a great debate to be had about whether creative writing can be taught, I think my job on that side really comes down to helping students learn how to cultivate what the poet Linda Gregg calls our resonant sources, the stuff that we cannot escape, the stuff that's in our DNA and in our souls. And it doesn't have to be a literal transliteration of that onto the page, but everything on the page is informed by what is the deepest within us, the landscapes that we grew up in, the memories that are inherited, as Kohar's beautiful essay talks about. And so as I'm trying to help students do that, I'm also trying to gather the courage in my own work to face that and do that in my work too. So whether I'm writing about Armenianness or not, I'm drawing on those gigantic themes of the past not being over, the past not being the past, really. The things that kind of inform my family and my probably, if there is such a thing as an essential self, I don't know if there is, but the deepest part of me is probably obsessed with that question. So that's what I'm working on.
I love that. It's good to catch up. And I have more questions, but time is really flying and I see a lot of questions in the chat. So I do want to open it up to our audience. I don't know if there's a place that is best to start. Questions coming in the chat box, hopefully here in a sec.
There were a bunch actually up top.
Yeah.
Earlier. There was one question from Aghajanian. Hi, Aghajanian. How are the essays in this collection chosen? Was there an overarching theme other than the diverse voices from the Armenian diaspora?
Well, I guess that one falls on me. So interestingly, usually in my editorial background, usually when I'm curating work, there's almost always an open call for submissions. Most of the editorial roles I've had kind of require bringing in lots and lots and lots of different material and deciding among that material what to put together, what fits together. But for this particular project, one thing the press asked for up front is they said, in your proposal, we want a list of potential contributors. We want to really know what this book is going to look like. And so for me, before the book had even been under contract before it was approved. I had to compile writers I was interested in, and had a lot of names under consideration, and eventually whittled that down to about 30 names, and then sent that to the press, and they said, this is good. We don't know that we'll have room for everybody based on word count and that type of thing, but let's run with it. That list of 30 got put down to a short list of 25. And those 25 writers, of those 25 writers, 4 or 5 said they could not commit to the project at the time. And then another 2 or 3 were really interested and committed. And then later, unfortunately, again, this project happening in summer 2020, a few of the writers started the project and then just said, the pandemic has changed my life. I can't focus on this right now, rightfully so, and stepped away. And so from that list of 25 came down to about the 18 that we have here. And I think it turned out really wonderfully. But to JP's point, I think about the volume 2, I really believe in that first line of my editor's note, the one that argues that anthologies are as defined by their omissions as their inclusions. And one of the really difficult parts of this project, at least for me, was knowing, okay, I have room for about 20-ish essays, and that amount of space feels big at the time, but then is not really that much, and there's so much, I think, missing from this. And even one of the things I realized, talking about things changing over the past 3 or 4 years, or 3 years or so, one of the things that changed for me as this book came closer was wondering, what if I had more, diversity of geography? What if I had more diversity in age? There should be transgender voices in here. There needs to be kind of, more. And so it's hard when you're curating, right? And so I guess that was, it's been one of the tough things, I think, as the book kind of came from idea, concept to fruition, it's thinking about, well, what's missing and how can we make up for that? And I hope part of that maybe is a volume 2. I hope part of that is the discussions we're having now and making as much space as possible for those voices to be published in other venues as well. Oh man, we're getting lots of questions down here now. Thanks to all who created this book. I wanted to ask about the title. How do you hear it in your mind's ear? We are all Armenian. We are all Armenian. We are all Armenian, or we are all Armenian. That emphasis on the last one was not very good. I'm sorry for all of the above. Any thoughts on any of that? Anyone?
I like this question because even reading out loud, you realize you're hearing it in your head a certain way. And when you speak it out into existence, it does change the meaning of something, any type of writing. For me, I'll just answer quickly. I hear we are all Armenian, all. And that allness, that wholeness is apparently in my mind where the emphasis is. And I'm curious to hear what you all hear as well. I love that question, though. It's really interesting.
I think I hear it that way too, Kohar. And I think it's funny to hear the word "are" emphasized feels so defensive. It's like we are all Armenians. I don't hear it that way. I feel like it's the opposite of defensive. It's really expansive, and I think that all does that work for me too.
I'm wrestling with this one. Actually, I mean, to your point, Chris, about R feeling defensive, I always feel like, again, my own personal journey, that I'm defending that I am, right, part of the Armenian community. And there are so many folks that keep trying to kick me out of it, particularly on Twitter. And I'm just going to block you all until I finally decide to get off that stupid thing. But yeah, so I guess I'm leaning towards R right now. Yeah, that's a really great question. Thank you, Marc.
I think I'm also in the all camp. I like the emphasis there. But that said, that question and kind of the one after it about the relationship to the title, and how informed the decision to use that phrase as the title of the book, not only in Scout's essay, but then as it was chanted by over 100,000 mourners in Turkey in protest of Hrant Dink's assassination. It was a discussion among the marketing team at the press. I don't know. I actually haven't asked Scout how she came to that decision to title her essay that individually. I think it really, in the work itself, if you read Scout's essay, I think it's spoken to well there. But that's something that we would have to ask her probably. But that does maybe lead me to maybe a larger question for the three of you, which would be, now having read the book, I know we have a couple other contributors on Zoom, and also just that, I want to shout out to other people in the anthology. Are there any, particular pieces that stood out to you, or things that, essays you read where you really were like, I'm taking a lot from this, or really, can pull a lot of this into my own work, or see a connection here with my own work?
Well, I was talking before the event started about Olivia's beautiful essay in the book, A Good Solid Name. And it comes up in a lot of our essays too, the power of names to fix into place something that is unfixable. This question of identity that's constantly in flux. And a name does the most work that you can do to kind of pin down a part of yourself that can be communicated to the rest of the world. And Olivia's essay is about naming her daughter, and but I liked thinking about it in relation to Cohar's essay of the opposite relationship, being named by, and that relationship of naming and being named by is one of the threads I keep seeing in the collection. What are we naming, and who are we being named by, and what does that power entail? What are the limitations of that power? What are the benefits and the possibilities of that power?
Okay, I'll go because we're running out of time. It's really difficult to choose. And now that I'm done with the hazing exam process, I am going to be meditating, actually sitting with the book in a way that I feel like I've only got to, full disclaimer, I'm only about halfway through the book because I really want to give every single work equal time and energy, which I have not really had, but I'm so excited for the summer. But two really meaningful contributions that came out of this are from two dear friends that I knew before this anthology, Sophia Armen and Carene Rose, who are both organizers. I had the pleasure of going to college with Carene Rose, who's also Black and Armenian. And you can imagine when I found out she also went to the school, I thought someone was playing a prank on me. They're like, yeah, you've never met her? She's 1 year older than you. And the rest is history. It was incredible. And Sophia Armen, we've done a lot of organizing together. And to have her work just come right before mine was especially special because in 2018, we met at the American Studies Association conference, and I went to her talk, and I remember it was the first time I'd ever, and so much has happened since then, I really felt like someone in my generation and also in my same field was speaking the exact same language. We were drawing from ethnic studies, from so much that I was saying on the East Coast, she was saying on the West Coast, and we've become really good friends since then. And her essay was just so beautiful. And it's extra special when you know someone. So yeah, my answer.
I'll second Olivia's. And so to talk about part two, Olivia, I want to see part two of that essay now. Congratulations on your son. And yeah, Sophia's essay just also really rang true to me as someone who is constantly asked, are you Irish? Are you Greek? Are you Jewish? Are you Palestinian? Are you Arabic? Are you from India? Like, that really rang true for me, that essay.
Can I just say very quickly to JP's essay, there's a back-to-back scene. There's a section, there are a bunch of sections. You talk about the fragmented nature of that essay. There's one section that just has two scenes back to back. They're not separated by a white space. And it's the scene of him as a young boy in church with the pastor saying, okay, who's going to stand up and save this boy from sin? And then right after that, this college graduation scene where there's an act of intimidation and potential violence right next to each other. And I remember reading that essay at that moment and just getting chills and just being kind of in awe. So whatever imposter syndrome you're feeling, JP, is really not real, because I was stunned by that moment in that essay.
And Chris, just so that we don't leave anyone hanging, there is a question, what's your favorite Soroyan? So I do feel like before we leave, you need to answer that.
I mean, so talk about antiquated. Someone mentioned antiquated, but I love Soroyan so much that I refuse to call him antiquated. I think his work really does survive and is worth reading. There's a story in My Name is Aram that's my favorite story. I think it's the first story in the collection. It's just a kind of tale of these young Armenians in Fresno that steal a horse, and they ride the horse all night, and they're just racing through the villages. I call them villages. It's Fresno. It's not villages, but in my mind, it's like this kind of mythological space. And the beauty and the humor. There it is. Yeah, it's a gorgeous, gorgeous story. So read the first story of My Name is Aram and then tell me that he's antiquated. I think he's timeless. Yeah.
That one is selfishly also my favorite for no reason at all. But Olivia, can we pass it back to you? Are there any kind of announcements on the way out?
Well, thank you all. I'm actually going to pass it to Marc Mamigonian, who's our NAASR representative. Marc.
Thank you. Thanks, Olivia. Thank you to our speakers today, Aram Mrjoian, Kohar Avakian, Chris McCormick, and JP Boghossian, and the other outstanding contributors to this great volume. And thank you, of course, to the International Armenian Library Alliance, the National Association for Armenian Studies and Research, NAASR, and the Krikor and Clara Zohrab Information Center for co-sponsoring the event and this series. And speaking on behalf of NAASR, I'm really pleased to be a part of this series of Literary Lights programs, which is showcasing some great work being done by Armenian writers. And I'm personally especially glad that there is this new volume, We Are All Armenian, all emphasized, which we have heard about today, showcasing this diversity of Armenian diasporan writing and voices. To the attendees, thank you as well. There will be a feedback survey appearing on your screen when the event ends. Please take a few moments to share your thoughts on today's program. And I invite you all who are able to join us for the next Literary Lights program on Wednesday, May 17th, when NAASR will host Dr. Susan Barba, editor of American Wildflowers, a literary field guide, as well as an outstanding poet, who will be in conversation with Dr. Jesse Arlen of the Zohrab Center. This will be an in-person event at the NAASR Vartan Gregorian building in Belmont, Mass, and it will be recorded and made available online after the event. And it too, of course, is co-sponsored by the International Armenian Literary Alliance, NAASR, and the Krikor and Clara Zohrab Information Center. So till then, thank you and congratulations to everybody for your great work, and thank you.